At 12:47 p.m. on March 14, 1944, Corporal James "Jimmy" Keller wasn't looking at the German he was about to kill. He was looking at two burned roof beams, 40 feet over his own head. From the second floor of a shattered Italian farmhouse on the south side of the Rapido River Valley, he lay flat on dusty boards, cheek welded to the stock of his M1903A4 Springfield. The scope's black circle cut the ruined world down to one thing: a knife-thin strip of daylight between those beams, no wider than a playing card. 480 yards beyond that slot of sky, across a valley chewed into craters and white chalk scars, sat the bunker. To higher command, it was just a red square on a map labeled German O.P. To the regiment, it was the Widowmaker. For 3 weeks, anything that moved in that valley drew its attention. The pattern never changed. A platoon dropped over the crest, hunched low, legs pumping. 5, maybe 10 seconds of hope, then the glass in the bunker slit, caught a glint. A head came up, and somewhere inside that block of concrete, a voice spoke calmly into a field telephone. 30 seconds after that, 105mm shells came walking in like a man stamping out a line of ants. 17 men had died in frontal attempts to reach that bunker. Another handful never even made it to the halfway point. On a bad day, they lost 8 Americans in that valley. On a good day, only 3. Snipers had tried. British, Canadian, American. Skilled men with solid reputations. They'd found good hides, dialed their scopes, read the mirage. Their bullets cratered the face of the emplacement, sparked off stone, chewed the lip of the embrasure. The German observer never stopped talking on that phone. Because what looked like a simple slit in concrete from the American side hid a dogleg inside, offset, angled, protected by shoulder-thick walls and overhead rock, a straight lee. A shot could not reach the man behind it. Doctrine, diagrams, and hard experience all agreed. Effectively immune to direct small arms fire from the front. And yet here was Keller, not aiming at the front at all. Under his left hand, the floor vibrated as American guns a mile behind them sent another battery's worth of shells over their heads. Under his right index finger, the trigger felt almost weightless. Private Russo, his spotter, lay tight in beside him, one eye on the valley, the other on Keller. "Jimmy," Russo hissed, "I don't even see the damn bunker in your scope. You sure you're not losing it?" Keller didn't blink. "I see what I need," he murmured. "You don't shoot the bunker. You shoot the line." 10 years earlier, in a South Boston pool hall, he would have been talking about a 3-cushion bank shot across green felt. Today, the pocket was the inside edge of a German officer's skull. The rails were charred beams and invisible geometry through concrete. He exhaled, slow and steady. The crosshair settled on empty air, the thin white of sky, between wood blackened by fire. If he was right, the .30-06 round would leave the muzzle, thread that slot without touching either side, cross the entire width of the Rapido Valley, and arrive inside the bunker through its blind spot, at the one angle no one had designed for. If he was wrong, the bullet would smack into timber, or vanish into the hillside, or ricochet into nothing. Down below, riflemen shifted behind rocks too shallow to deserve the name cover. Somewhere in that concrete box, a German with a good map and better eyesight was ready to resume his day's work. Keller's world narrowed to the trigger, the gap, and the memory of how angles behaved when you respected them. He started to squeeze. And as the rifle broke, we pull away, back through the scope, through the beams, across the valley, away from the unseen flight of the bullet, to where this story really begins. With a kid who learned, long before the army, that felt and geometry never lied. Long before Keller learned the smell of cordite and wet wool, his world smelled like chalk dust, stale beer, and cigarette smoke. Doyle's Billiards sat on Dorchester Avenue, the kind of place you entered through a door that never quite closed, and a fog of talk that never quite stopped. To the respectable part of Boston, it was a den of loafers and small-time hustlers. To Jimmy, age 15, it was the first place that had ever made perfect sense. School didn't. Teachers talked in straight lines. History marched in paragraphs. None of it felt real. But under the jaundiced lamps over Doyle's tables, the world was nothing but angles and cause and effect. He started as the grocery boy's son sent on errands for lemons and ice. Then he was the kid everyone ignored in the corner chair, the one who sat perfectly still and watched as men twice his age traced invisible paths across green cloth with their eyes before making a move. The first time he saw a proper bank shot, a cue ball strike a rail with the barest kiss of English, bounce off at a crazy angle, touch two more cushions, and gently tap an object ball into a side pocket. He couldn't sleep for 2 nights. His mind kept drawing and redrawing the angle of incidence, angle of reflection, how the spin reversed the exit, how a fraction of an inch at one end changed everything at the other. He stole scrap butcher paper from the family shop and filled it with triangles and arcs. He chalked invisible spots on the table's rails and muttered to himself while he practiced in off hours. Old Man Doyle, polishing glasses behind the bar, watched this lanky, serious boy with a twitch of amusement. "You know the thing about this game, Jimmy?" he said one night, nodding toward the table where the boy was studying a tough leave. "Ball don't care what you meant to do. Felt doesn't care if you're rich, poor, dumb, smart. You hit the right spot. But with the right stroke, it has to go where the line says. Angles don't lie, people do." The sentence lodged somewhere deep. Angles don't lie. By 18, Keller could run most amateurs out of Doyle's without breaking sweat. The hustling came easy. Play dumb, lose a little, then turn on the math and walk the table until his opponent's wallet looked lighter. He wasn't proud of it. But in a South Boston rent ledger, pride was a luxury. Then the newsreels changed. The flickering images at the front of the movie house, once all Hollywood smiles and dance numbers, turned into tanks grinding over cobblestones, cities burning, black-helmeted soldiers marching under banners he didn't understand but instinctively hated. London bombed, Rotterdam burning, reports of American volunteers flying for the British. Doyle's began to thin out. A name would vanish from the chalkboard on the wall. Sometimes a letter came back, sometimes nothing did. The loudest mouth at the back table went quiet the day he opened his draft notice. Jimmy thought about hiding his own letter when it arrived, thought about the way his mother's hands had shaken reading it, thought about his father, coughing and gray, who'd never had the chance to go prove himself anywhere except the docks. Instead, he walked into the recruiting station with his birth certificate in one hand and Doyle's chalk still on his fingers. "Occupation?" the clerk asked, barely looking up. Jimmy hesitated, then said it because it was there on his tax stub. "Billiard hall attendant." The man smirked, then he put a rifle in Keller's hands at basic and watched the smirk drain away. Targets at 200, 300, 500 yards went down like obedient balls into pockets. Wind flags and mirage lines might as well have been table rails and spin. Where other men saw a blur of distance, Keller saw something simpler, points on a line. By the time someone in training command flipped open his scorecard and wrote "sniper candidate" in a margin, Keller had figured something out. You could hang a scope on a rifle. You could drill men in positions and breathing, but you couldn't make everyone see the way lines behaved. At the sniper course, he learned Doctrine, range cards, target prioritization, acceptable shots, low percentage shots, positions to avoid, positions to seek. He passed the tests, memorized the diagrams, nodded in the right places. But a part of him kept thinking of Doyle's. In the manual, impossible was a category. On the pool table, impossible had just meant no one's found the angle yet. He left for Italy with a Springfield, a scope, and that quiet disagreement buried somewhere under his new corporal's chevrons. In the winter mud overlooking the Rapido, with a German observer writing his friends' deaths from behind offset concrete, that disagreement was about to surface. On paper, the Rapido line was just another step on the slow, murderous climb up Italy's spine. On the ground, it was a soaked, stinking stretch of earth that smelled like bad drainage, old vineyards, and cordite. The river itself was narrow but treacherous, cold, fast, channelized between banks that turned to grease when it rained. The German observation post that anchored their sector didn't look like much at first glance. Half buried in the slope, a squat rectangle of poured concrete with a slit across its front, a smear of darker shadow under a line of earth and rock. Someone, probably before the war, had terraced the hillside. The bunker sat where grapevines might once have clung. The first company to try the crossing went in under the old textbook. Plumes of smoke laid along the far bank, squads moving in staggered rushes, machine guns covering breaks. For almost a minute, it looked like the book might be right for once. Then the smoke thinned. Someone in that little slit with a good glass saw what he needed to see. A head disappeared. A handset came up to a mouth. Words crackled down a line. Artillery shells don't care about courage. They came in bracketing bursts, walked onto men who had nowhere to go but forward or back. Forward was barbed wire and overlapping MG-42 arcs. Back was a slope being scooped out by high explosive. They tried both and paid for both. By the time the survivors scrambled back over the brow of the hill, leaving stretchers and bodies and rifles in the mud behind them, the Widowmaker had won its title. Snipers came next. An old pattern in a new war. The Canadian set up in a ragged olive grove, reading his scope through shimmering air. The Brit tried from the flank, looking to bounce a shot off an angle. An American sergeant with Guadalcanal behind him and Italy ahead moved from crater to crater, hoping a lucky ricochet might snake through wood. A straight shot wouldn't. They all came back frustrated, if they came back at all. One took a mortar fragment on the exfil. Another had his scope shattered by a counter-sniper's round that turned the glass in front of his eye into diamond dust. It was only when engineers finally got a better look, crawling forward under darkness and fear, that the Germans' trick revealed itself. The apparent slit was just the mouth. Inside, a reinforced dogleg. The observer could stand in a little alcove to the side, look out along the offset, and never present a straight-on profile to the outside world. Like a bully sticking his hand out from behind a wall, inviting you to hit what you could never quite reach. In the regimental command post, a cellar with a leaky roof, maps on the table acquired new pencil marks. Red arrows going down into the valley, thin lines trying to show where they might curve out again, a box around the bunker with a question mark. Keller arrived the day after the 6th failed probe. He stepped into that cellar, mud still drying on his boots, and followed the officer's fingers as they traced routes along paper. "Every time we put steel in that valley, that O.P. owns us," the battalion S3 said quietly. "We can't keep feeding it rifle companies. We need it blind." "Can we take it from the flank?" someone asked. The intelligence captain shook his head. "Steep rock and open ground on both sides for 300 yards. They built it where they knew we couldn't walk around it." "Then we bury it," another voice said. "Get divisional to drop something heavy on it." "They're already crying for guns at Cassino," the S3 snapped. "You want to argue with them? Be my guest." The room simmered. Keller, at the back, let his eyes wander from the map to the low window, and through it, to the broken silhouette of the farmhouse up the slope behind their line. From here, its skeleton looked like a pile of matchsticks, roofs and beams tangled in on themselves, just more ruin in a country full of it. He tilted his head, thinking of the way rails and table edges had translated force at Doyle's, of how a shot didn't care a bush. "Out your intention, only about the line it was given." "What's your read, Corporal?" the intel man asked, catching the sniper's eye, maybe just to break the tense silence. Keller didn't look at the map again. He looked at the land. "We've been thinking straight," he said slowly. "He knows how to beat straight. Maybe it's time to think crooked." The officers traded looks. "English, Keller," the S3 said, weary. "What are you proposing?" Keller nodded toward the ruined farmhouse. "I want that house," he said, "and a day to walk every inch of it with my rifle." The farmhouse had been beautiful once. You could see it in the bones. Thick stone walls mortared by hands that knew their trade. Beams of chestnut too heavy for 2 men to lift without a third cursing from below. Tile roof that had probably glowed warm red in autumn sun, watching grapes come in and olives go out. Now, half the roof was a hole framing bad weather. The beams were blackened and cracked from some past shell. One corner of the upper floor sagged, where its support had given up. Plaster hung in lolling sheets, pocked by shrapnel and small arms fire. The engineers who'd swept the area had written a neat X over it on their sketch maps. Ruined building, their note read. No continuous cover, limited tactical use. Keller read that and smiled a humorless little smile. Limited tactical use. If you only thought in straight lines. He and Russo went in slow, rifles slung, boots careful on stairs that might or might not still remember how to be stairs. Every creak sounded loud in the empty shell. Every hole in the floor reminded them that gravity still worked in Italy. On the second floor, where the roof damage was worst, Keller dropped to a knee and brought his glass up, first out the blown sidewall to the valley, then upward, toward the rafters. "Get your head down, Jimmy," Russo muttered. "Lot of eyes on this ridge." "On us?" Keller said softly. "Or on that valley?" He let his left eye wander, unfocused, tracing the jagged edges of beams and broken tiles. On a pool table, the trick had been to stop staring at the pocket and start staring at the rails. Once you knew where those were, the rest followed. Here, the rails were heavy timbers pinned into the masonry. Some ran true, level. Others had shifted, sagged, split. For long minutes he just looked, ignoring Russo's fidgeting, until his brain began to turn the scene into something else, not wreckage, but a three-dimensional grid of potential lines. He lay down on the boards and brought the Springfield up, letting the scope's field of view tighten that grid. The first angle he tried put the gap between two beams squarely over the valley floor, a good 200 yards short of the bunker. Too low. He shifted his position a foot to the left, an inch back. The slot of light swung like a search beam, now pointing at the river itself. Too far, again. "Jimmy, this is crazy," Russo said at last. "We got good shots from lower down on his front face. Why are we messing around up here?" Keller spoke without taking his eye off the optic. "Because his front face isn't where he lives," he said. "He's off to the side, tucked back, like a guy hiding behind the solid part of a door and sticking his hand through the crack to flip you off." "You and your pictures," Russo muttered. Keller moved again, this time not just sliding, but lowering and raising his shoulder until the scope's view framed a different pair of beams entirely. Between them, a rectangular gap, maybe 2 inches tall. Beyond it, blurred, the far slope. He adjusted the focus until the distant hillside came sharp. The familiar outline of the bunker's right shoulder edged into the lower quadrant of his sight picture, not in the open, but just beyond the edge of the light. He held his breath. From this position, the gap between beams did not overlay the bunker's face. It pointed invisibly at the side of the slit, at the little bit of interior air where a man might stand thinking he was safe. He lowered the rifle and marked the boards with his thumb, brought it up again, confirmed, lowered, pulled a pencil from behind his ear, pilfered from the CP, and drew a small cross on the beam exactly where his front sight hood had lined up in the underlay of his vision. "What are you doing?" Russo asked. "Locking in the line," Keller said. "If I got shoved out of the way right now and had to find it again in a hurry, I want a mark." He spent the next hour mapping the space like a madman, a cross for too low, another for too high, a double-lined X for where the gap lined up with solid rock. Little by little, the no marks narrowed the yes to a patch the size of a palm where beam, gap, and valley agreed. When he finally pushed himself up, knees popping, the sunlight had shifted in the gap, making the 2 inches of sky look almost golden. Russo leaned back against a wall, arms folded. "Even if you're right, if that stupid slot really does line up exactly with his hidey hole, you still gotta time it. You're guessing when he's going to be standing in that space, too." "Not guessing," Keller said. "Watching." He pulled his notebook from his pocket, flipped it open. On one page, a rough sketch of the bunker face and a dogleg inside it. On the other, a column of times, scribbled at 15-minute intervals with tiny notes. Binocs, phone, smoke, long look, left. "You've been spying on him?" Russo said, surprised. "For days," Keller replied. "He's not just a dot in a slit. He's a man with habits. Every 15 minutes, give or take, he leans that little bit extra. Checks the far left, then the far right, like he's making sure the whole field is still under his thumb." Russo shook his head. "This is a lot of work to kill one guy." Keller stared through the gap again, imagining a felled growl-clad skull occupying the space where his reticle would be. "You seen how many crosses are behind our line?" he asked quietly. "Seems cheap compared to that." Keller expected pushback. He didn't expect to be laughed at. Back in the cellar's CP, he laid his notebook on the table and talked them through it. The beams, the slot, the dogleg, the observer's routine. He knew better than to say bank shot. He used the language they liked instead. Indirect line of sight, oblique ingress, lateral approach. The battalion operations officer still stared as if he'd just suggested throwing rocks. "You're telling me," the major said slowly, "that instead of taking a direct shot from a lower, more stable position, you want to fire, sideways, through a hole in a burned-out roof, and hope the bullet curves into a hole in the side of a bunker we can't even see." "It won't curve," Keller said, jaw tight. "It'll go straight. That's the point. The line's there. We just haven't used it." The major jabbed a finger at the manual on the table between them, open to the section on engaging fortified positions. "This," he said, "this is Doctrine. This stuff was written by men who've been at this longer than you've been hustling pool halls, Keller. They say, get armor on it, get engineers on it, get artillery on it. What they do not say is, send one corporal to go play tricks with beams over our only decent O.P. Keller stared at the diagrams, clean, labeled cross-sections of bunkers that bore only a passing resemblance to the ugly, jagged truth across the valley. "With respect, sir," he said, feeling the words grind past his teeth, "those little pictures don't have our valley under them, they don't have that bunker under them, and they sure as hell don't have that phone line attached to that observer." Russo shifted his weight at the edge of the room, wisely silent. The S2, the intel captain, cleared his throat. "Major," he said, "we keep sending companies down there under smoke, and they keep coming back with fewer men and nothing to show but another due. A's worth of dead. Corps keeps telling us to solve our own local issues before we ask for more guns. At some point, unconventional stops being crazy and starts being, well, necessary." The major glared at the map, then at the sniper. "What if you miss?" he demanded. "What if you give away that farmhouse? What if he clocks that we're up there and calls artillery in on our O.P.? You ready to write a letter to every mother of every man in that room?" Keller felt heat rise in his face. He thought of the crude crosses on the hill behind them, the ones nobody had gone to the trouble of writing letters for yet because the chaplain was too damn busy. "Sir," he said quietly, "we're already writing letters. We just haven't filled in the names yet. You give me one shot. All I'm asking, one bullet on one afternoon when the light's right and the wind's dead. If I can't make it, I'll spend the rest of this campaign exactly where you want me, shooting exactly the way your book says." The cellar shook as another German shell hit somewhere along the line. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. A mug of ersatz coffee danced on the table. The major flinched. Everyone did. War had a way of editing arguments. "Fine," he spat. "One shot. Then you're back on straight work. And if you die up there, I'm not wasting a squad dragging your body out of that damn attic. Clear?" "Yes, sir," Keller said. That night, belly empty and hands still vibrating with adrenaline, Keller lay in a slit trench, looking up at a sliver of Italian sky and thinking of another ceiling, another gap, another set of men watching a young guy line up something they swore could never work. He pictured Doyle, leaning on the bar, saying, "Angles don't lie, Jimmy." He wondered, frankly, if he was about to prove the old man right, or prove that war didn't care what games you used to play. The morning picked itself. They'd had fog 3 days running, the valley a gray bowl, where visibility closed down to 50 yards, and even the Germans seemed reluctant to waste shells on shadows. The 4th day dawned brutally clear, Light raked across the far slope, making every edge sharp. Keller woke before first stand-to, heart already hammering, as if his body knew before his brain caught up. "Today," he told Russo simply. They ate fast, lukewarm coffee and colder rations, and climbed. The farmhouse groaned under their weight, the boards complaining like old men. They moved with a burglar's caution, more afraid of falling through than of being seen. From outside, they were just two more ants in khaki crawling along a ridgeline. Inside, the little world they'd built waited. The marked beam, the cleared patch of floor, the firing position where every inch had been argued with gravity until rifle, shoulder, and line agreed. Keller lay down in the groove his body had worn yesterday. The Springfield settled into his hands like a familiar tool. He checked the scope one last time. No fogging, no dust. Bolt back, chamber cleared, then slid a single cartridge in with ceremony that would have felt foolish anywhere else. Russo set his own glass up beside him, elbows planted, eyes flicking from valley to watch to valley again. "Wind's nothing," he whispered. "Flags are dead. Smoke from our guns is going straight up." Keller felt a knot of fear he hadn't admitted to unclench a little. No wind meant fewer variables. It also meant every mistake was his alone. He eased the bolt forward, locked it down, and slid into his penciled cross under the beam, feeling for the exact spot where cheek weld and buttstock and trigger finger all aligned. The scope's world snapped into place, beam edges dark, gap bright. Beyond it, in crystal clarity, the battered face of the north slope, studded with scars. A little to the right, half in shadow, the Widowmaker's slit, a black smudge in concrete. He breathed, slow and deliberate, letting his heart settle. "Time?" he asked. Russo checked. "Observer's been on a 15-minute loop like clockwork," he said. "Last lean-in was 12:32. Next should be 12:47, give or take. It's 43 now." Keller nodded. 4 minutes to think about everything that could go wrong, or nothing at all. He let the minutes drip past. On the valley floor, infantry shifted cautiously, testing the space like a dog that's been kicked too often. No one moved more than a few yards. No one trusted the silence. At 12:46, a puff of dust appeared near the bunker's slit, the casual result of someone kicking at the lip from inside. "He's there," Russo murmured. "Glasses up. You'll catch him on the next lean. Remember, he bends just that bit extra at the end of his sweep." Keller stopped listening in words. The sound of Russo's voice became just cadence. He let his gaze soften, not on the bunker, but on the negative space of the slot between beams. The reticle sat dead center on that empty sky. His finger found the trigger, took up first pressure. The rifle and his breathing fell into sync. In his mind, he walked the path, powder igniting, bullet slamming into rifling, spinning into the gap, not quite touching it, crossing space like a cue ball gliding along felt, hitting not the obvious target but the place that led to it. "Now," Russo breathed. Keller didn't consciously decide. His muscles did. The shot cracked, punching dust off the beams, rattling the farmhouse's bones. Recoil drove into his shoulder. The scope view jumped and resettled an inch to the side. He'd fired 1,000 rounds in his life. His body knew good from bad even before his conscious mind caught up. This one had felt right. But feelings didn't mean a thing, not at 480 yards and through a trick of concrete and habit. He forced himself not to look up from the scope, not to lift his head and ask, "Did I get him?" like some recruit on a KD range. He pulled the rifle back into the same slot, the same cheek weld, and stared through the gap, past burned wood, at what came next. What came next, first, was nothing. The bunker's face stayed stubbornly the same slit, the same chipped concrete freckles, the same ugly right angle of shadow. A second ticked. 2, 5. Keller's heartbeat hammered in his ears louder than any gun. Then, faint through the stillness, he heard a sound that did not fit. A shout, high and sharp, edged with surprise instead of dead calm. "Something's wrong," Russo whispered. "I can't see inside, but they're moving." Another voice answered the first, harsher, pitched up half an octave, not the voice of a man reading off coordinates with bored precision. The voice of someone who had just seen a body fall where no enemy bullet was supposed to reach. A helmet appeared for an instant in the slit, jerked to one side as its wearer tried to see into the bunker itself. It vanished. A hand flailed briefly into view, gripping the edge of the concrete, then disappeared, hauling something or someone away from the slot. And in the center of Keller's scope, hanging now where before it had been taut and invisible, a field telephone cord swung gently back and forth, like a metronome. He didn't take the second shot that every predator instinct screamed for. The man with the helmet wasn't the point. The cord was. Minutes crawled. No glass flashed at the slit. No silhouette leaned in. No voice called down steel. Down in the valley, an American platoon leader felt the hair on his neck prickle. He moved his hand in the air, a little go signal, half expecting the Widowmaker to answer with the whip-crack howl of incoming. When it didn't, he risked another. "Move!" he yelled louder. "Now! While they're blind!" Men who had rehearsed this run in their nightmares shoved themselves out of their shallow scrapes and bolted. 2 by 2 bounding, they cut across ground they'd never been allowed to touch. Every second, every breath they wise. Ted for the shriek of falling shells. None came. From the farmhouse, Keller watched them scurry across his sight picture, then disappear into the relative safety of a culvert on the far side. One man tripped and got up laughing, a wild, unbelieving sound. Keller let the rifle sag, just a little. His shoulder ached. His jaw did too, from the tension. In the late afternoon, under cover of smoke that hadn't been needed in hours, a patrol crept toward the bunker. They found the entrance booby-trapped and the interior cramped, claustrophobic, smelling of damp concrete and the copper tang of blood. Behind the dogleg in the wall, just under the offset of the slit, a German officer lay on his side, as if he'd just sat down hard and forgotten to get back up. His field glasses were cracked open on the floor. A dark, neat hole had been punched in the side of his head, right where geometry and routine had conspired against him. The phone's handset lay a foot away from his outstretched fingers. The cord still swung slightly in the draft from the entrance. The patrol sergeant, not a sniper and not a pool player, couldn't have cared less about angles. He stepped back outside and waved toward the south slope. "Tell him it's clear," he said. "Tell him the son of a bitch is down for good." In the CP, someone took a grease pencil, and with the same casualness they'd once drawn its bounding box, ran a thick line through the Widowmaker's symbol on the map. "Neutralized," they wrote. It was a small word for what it meant in the bodies it would not now claim. Within weeks, the story mutated along the front. Some versions had Keller ricocheting the shot off a bell tower. Others had him drilling the observer directly through the phone mouthpiece. Men liked legends with flair. The truth was simpler, and to Keller, more satisfying. It had been there the whole time. The line, the angle, the way through. All it had taken was one man stubborn enough to believe that impossible didn't mean what the book said when the terrain said otherwise. Later that spring, a British sniper used a gap between 2 bombed-out chimneys in Cassino to knock out a machine gun crew who thought a side wall protected them. In another sector, a Canadian found a peculiar notch in a monastery parapet that let him shoot into a courtyard no one else could touch. By summer, an unofficial supplement was circulating among snipers in Italy, a typewritten sheet with greasy fingerprints and a title some clerk had tried to make respectable. Annex C, employment of oblique lines of sight against fortified targets. Buried in the middle of its dry prose were phrases Keller recognized in other men's words. Utilization of structural gaps, indirect engagement of offset embrasures, roof beam apertures as firing channels. He never saw his name in it. He didn't expect to. After the war, Doyle's billiards felt smaller. The tables were the same. The felt was newer. But there were spaces on the wall where certain names never got written again. The room was quieter, in ways only men who'd been loud in foxholes understood. One evening, a kid with 2 big hands and nervous eyes watched Keller run 3 rails to sink an impossible shot. Chalk dust puffed from the Q-tip as the balls clicked and fell. "Sir," the kid said, awkward, "I heard. People say you did that, with a rifle, over there." Keller looked at him for a long second, seeing the curiosity, the hunger, the need to believe that brains and stubbornness still mattered in a world trying hard to forget they ever had. "People say a lot of things," he answered. "Yeah, but how'd you see it?" the kid pressed. "That angle, that shot." Keller glanced down the length of the table, the line from cue ball to rail to target. Out of habit, his mind traced the route. Hit here, at this speed, with this spin, and the ball has no choice. "Same way you see any shot worth taking," he said. "You stop staring at what's blocking you, and you start looking for what it can't cover." The cue ball rolled, kissed the rail, and did exactly what the math said it must. Somewhere in an Army archive, a dusty binder bore Annex C in a font no one used anymore. Along some later front in some later war, a young soldier with a borrowed rifle and a stubborn brain might look at a safe enemy behind an offset wall and feel the itch that had once bothered a corporal from Boston. What if impossible just meant nobody had stayed up late enough to find the line?